Chris Mackowski of Emerging Civil War. I am with Greg Wade, the founder of the Franklin Civil War Roundtable, and we are at the cemetery at Carnton Plantation. And you say that there's a great story here, and I'm dying to hear it.
Okay. Well, this is the largest Confederate cemetery in the country. It's it's owned by the United Daughters, who maintain it. The soldiers here were, of course, killed during the Battle of Franklin. The story goes that after the Battle of Franklin, most of them were interred in shallow graves around the Carter House farm. In the spring of 1866, they realized that they had to do something with those graves because they couldn't stay on the Carter farm.
Because the farm was going
to be used as a farm. So Carrie McGavock, who was the lady of the house here at the Carnton Plantation, the McGavock family, heard the story and was pondering what to do. Well, it just so happens that during the war, a fellow by the name of George Cuppet, C-U-P-P-E-T-T, I think, came through here, and he was a Texan with Terry's Texas Rangers. While he was here, he met the overseer's wife, and they had an affair, a love affair, based on what I know. Anyway, he had to move on because of the war. He comes back after the war. Well, he didn't have a job or anything. He marries this girl over here, and Carrie McGavock says, "George, I'll pay you whatever it was at the time to reinter all those bodies from the Carter House over here. I will donate the acreage." So in the spring of 1866, all spring, he's transporting these bodies over here.
Wow.
Now you can imagine what that must have been like. Many of them were not, were unknowns. A sizable number were unknowns, but as they often did during the war, many of them would write their name in their state on a piece of paper and put it on their blouse. So George kept a journal of everybody that he could identify.
Wow.
The journal is now today at the Carnton House, and you can see the journal.
Yeah.
For years after the war, Carrie McGavock was getting inquiries as, do you know, is my son in that journal? Is my husband in that journal?
Wow.
Is my family member, my loved one? And for years she would say, no, they're not, or what have you. So it's a very poignant story about how this cemetery came to be and about her role in maintaining the cemetery, really until her death, at which time she communicated with veterans' families. If you can imagine, if you had a loved one who was off with the Army of Tennessee, and the last time they heard from them might have been Spring Hill, northern Alabama, and they don't know where their son is. It's also the basis of the book, part of the book that Robert Hicks wrote called Widow of the South, which has really done a lot to put this place on the map.
Mm-hmm. Now, the bodies here are arranged by state.
Correct.
And what was their rationale for doing that?
Well, there's a story that about Arlington. I think it was Meigs, who was the quartermaster of Arlington, who said we're not going to bury them by state because we just fought a war about statehood, states' rights.
George Thomas says the same thing in Chattanooga.
Yes.
He's like, I'm sick of state rights.
Yes.
Just bury them together.
But of course, Confederate soldiers, they still wanted to be buried by state.
Okay.
And they, there aren't any really Confederate soldiers in the federal cemeteries. Stones River is where many of the federal who were killed here are buried. So this is the burial place for the Battle of Franklin for the Confederates. Many of them Mississippians who came right across the ground we're standing on.
Wow. Now, my colleague, Chief Historian Chris Kolakowski, my Polish brother with the Emerging Civil War, he has referred to this as the death ride of the Army of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And you can most poignantly see that by standing in this cemetery and looking at these graves. What's it like to be here and walk through this cemetery, particularly if you're coming through in the evening and the sun is setting when those soldiers were crossing this ground?
Well, cemeteries, as history people, we like to go in cemeteries, which I took my wife to a cemetery on our second date, I think. And
true history nerd right there.
Yeah, exactly. But there's so many stories. As you know, you'll see a name, and there's always that story. One of the most compelling times here is during the anniversary. We will have 10,000 candles out in this field right behind you here, representing all the casualties of the Battle of Franklin. And if you stand here and you see 10,000 candles at night, backdrop against the cemetery, it's so powerful that we have people who have tears in their eyes because it brings home the cost of war. And walking through here, like a lot of places, there's always a legend that this place is, that people see things. I think people have come here to try to prove the supernatural or whatever it is. It's just one of those kind of places that when you're here at certain times and it's quiet, you can feel it. This grave here is the only civilian in the Carnton Cemetery, Marcellus Cuppet. He and his brother George were responsible for reinterring the bodies from their original shallow graves around the Carter farm in the spring of 1866. He and George could be seen moving the bodies a mile and a half or so over here, and he died during the process. And I've always wondered if he died just because of the stress and heartbreak of it all. They were from outside of San Antonio, and George had come with Terry's Texas Rangers. I'm not sure how Marcellus got here, but he's here. His brother George is buried in downtown Franklin at another cemetery.
So we're at the cemetery at Carnton Plantation on the Franklin battlefield, literally right on the battlefield. So, Greg, this has been a fantastic tour today so far. I appreciate you showing us around.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So, Greg Wade with the Franklin Civil War Roundtable. I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War. Thanks for spending some time with us out here.